Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where a doggo reads to you for a bit. In today's episode of Dungeons & Dragons Horror Stories, we have a tale of a DM that lets the power go to his head, and is so spiteful of any slight that he does things that would make you think that he's a child. But before we dive into this cluster of a story, I think we need some lucky to prepare us for the mountain of cringe that we're about to embark into. Lucky. He's always catting the best way he can cat. And with the wholesome levels up, let's dive right into the story. The Worst Game I Was Ever Part Of, by Reddit user Knight9910. I want to tell you about the worst RP I've ever been part of. Before I begin, a little info. This was like 20 years ago when I was fresh out of high school. The game was played over IRC chat. The system was a homebrewed one created by our main GM from the ground up. And despite everything I'm about to say, it was a pretty cool system that allowed for a lot of freedom for the players. Also, yes, I said main GM, as we had 4. The main dude and 3 co-GMs. Oh yeah, and they all ran their own superpowered GM PCs that were beyond max level and had abilities and powers the rest of us weren't allowed to have. The story involved our characters as part of a sort of global peacekeeping agency. We traveled around, fought villains and monsters, all that sort of stuff. But the backdrop for this was, well, I'll get to that. Also, yes, you're probably about to think I'm really stupid for having gone through all of this. All I can say is, I was naive enough at the time to think I could get through to the GMs and make them fix stuff. I don't do that anymore. Also, this is long, so I'm going to try and organize it a bit into sections so you can take a break and come back if you need to. With that all out of the way. Never met a game I didn't like. First problem, no one involved really had any sort of sense of working together as a team. Everyone in the game was so terrified of being accused of metagaming, though everyone here probably knows that's acting in character based on out-of-character knowledge or thinking, that a lot of players wouldn't even speak out of character, ever, for any reason. In character, they would also prefer to just shut down and do stupid things out of fear. The most egregious example of this comes from one battle. The enemy was a sort of sentient magical tornado that could absorb elements. The first time it would be hit with an elemental attack, it would absorb it, and then future attacks of that type would heal it, and it would add that damage type to its own attacks too. It hit like a freight train, and before long, all of our party was dead except for the mage, who was played by one of the co-GMs and was like level 50 or something, hence why he alone was still standing. This wasn't unusual, by the way. This game was extremely hard, but also incredibly lenient. You could get killed out of nowhere at any time, but every PC got multiple lives for each mission. If we used up all of our lives, we would still be revived. We just wouldn't continue the mission. And as long as one PC survived, we would get XP and treasure. Anyway, the mage is the only one left and is really struggling. We suggested, why not try using ice? Maybe the monster couldn't absorb the antithesis of something it had already absorbed. You know. The mage's player gave one of his very few out-of-character comments to tell us that he would not be doing that. See, use ice versus fire is an out-of-character thought process based on our knowledge of how video games work. That is to say, metagaming. Or, it's a well-known part of this game's world's physics, which would be understood by most people who lived in said world, in much the same way that, in our world, we all know that washing hands kills germs, fire extinguishers extinguish fires, and sticking a fork in a light socket hurts. And especially considering this is a professional warrior wizard who trained at a magic college. It didn't matter. He shut down and just started blasting the thing with fireballs over and over, as it slowly whittled down his insane health pool. Finally, he gave in to peer pressure enough to at least retreat before the thing killed him, so we could all at least get some XP and treasure for the marathon session we'd just gone through. The main GM punished him for retreating privately, so I don't know what he got. GM ist mein Führer. I eventually caught on that this insane fear was because the GMs were utter tyrants, both in and out of character. Out of character, they made stupid and arbitrary rules that they refused to budge on, even when they themselves admitted they were wrong. My character was a mechanic, which I was informed was a class that had actually not been playtested. I was literally the first person to ever play this class, ever. The main GM was actually excited about me playing it, saying that I would be his playtester and that he would listen very closely to my feedback, and we would make this a good class together. Spoiler alert, he didn't listen to my feedback at all. Every time I informed him of a problem, I was told that it was my fault. My strongest attack deals 3 hits of 25 damage each for 75 total, while everyone else can do 100 plus damage, then still have a bonus action or 2 to use. My fault. I obviously just didn't understand how to play the class. It was eventually explained to me that my attacks were weak on purpose, because I was supposed to use a mechanical minion that would fight alongside me in combat. You would think that if that was the case, then I would be given a minion as a class feature. But no, I wasn't. There wasn't even anything in the class or its lore that suggested using a minion. I also wasn't allowed to build a robot minion, as that would be overpowered, GM's words. I had to find and hack a robot on one of our missions. Needless to say, 6 game sessions later, we still had yet to see any robots. When I asked for one, I was told I was being selfish. The GMs were running the game they wanted to run, and I had no right to ask them to make even the slightest concessions for me, even though there was no real reason for them not to. It's not even like robots would have clashed with what was going on. We had plenty of robotic-like enemies even, but none that the GMs agreed were robotic enough for me to hack them. GM is also a spiteful bastard. There was another time when we fought a boss who had damage reduction 50, which could not be bypassed by anything. Yes, you heard me right. Damage reduction 50. Now, as I already said, this wasn't that weird. We could regularly do far more damage than that. So could I. Except, I had to use my triple missile barrage power, which dealt 3 hits of 25 damage each, and the boss's damage reduction applied to each hit separately. It was also immune to status conditions and debuffs, so I couldn't even offer support. I did have a copy box tech that could mimic one move the enemy had, but the GMs ruled that boss's capabilities were too advanced for my tech to mimic. Long story short, the boss was 100% immune to everything I could do. My complaints were, of course, unheeded, and the GM ruled that as punishment for speaking out, the defeated boss's monster corpse fell on my house and destroyed all of my possessions. Oh, but wait, it gets worse. Because right now, you're thinking that the spitefulness I'm talking about was the GM having the boss monster crash onto my house. No. The GM confessed to us all afterwards that the boss monster itself was intended as a punishment against me, because I one-shotted his last boss monster in the last mission this co-GM had run. Except, here's the thing. I didn't one-shot his boss. He did. The game session had gone on for a bit longer than he wanted it to. He didn't feel up to running an entire boss fight at the end, nor did he want to wait until next session just to run one fight. So instead, he spot rolled that my attack caused a cave-in, which killed the boss instantly. And then he punished me for his decision by creating a boss that I couldn't touch. And then he punished me for not liking that by destroying all of my stuff that I wasn't currently wearing or holding. Spiteful and also incompetent. On another occasion, one of the co-GMs built a solo mission just for me. I found out later that he created this mission to teach me a lesson. See, I'd been relying on my weapon too much, a really cool tech gauntlet that my mechanic made himself that could shoot energy bolts from the fingers, and I'd upgraded it to the 9s so that it was more damaging than most actual skills. As he said, I was relying on it way too much when I was supposed to use my skills instead. You know, the skills that sucked and that the GMs refused to fix, even though they specifically told me that I was their playtester and that they would listen very closely to my feedback. Anyway, he made this mission specifically to teach me to use my abilities more, because this guy was a genius master of intellectuosity. He did this by putting me up against a boss that was literally immune to everything I had except my weapon. A fire dragon that healed from fire when all of my special attacks were all missiles that dealt fire damage. Well, technically, I shouldn't say it was immune to everything. I could have used my taser, 5 electric damage plus stun, though the dragon was immune to stun, so it'd just be 5 electric damage, as opposed to my primary weapons, 5 hits of 10 damage each. Also, I did have my copy box, but it was random what it decided to copy, and I got the dragon's fire breath attack, so... Here's the best part. The co-GM confessed afterward that this had actually all been a complete accident. See, even though this entire mission had been made 100% specifically for me to teach me a lesson, the co-GM hadn't actually bothered to tailor it to me. He'd never actually looked at my character sheet or at the class I was using, and had no idea what my actual capabilities were. He just made a boss that he thought was cool, and told me that he wanted me to fight it without my primary weapon. Then, purely by coincidence, my primary weapon ended up being the only thing that could hurt it. Long story short, I was punished for this by being told that my weapon broke in the fight and I had to pay to repair it. And in character. They weren't any better. Might have been worse, actually. My character had guns pointed at him on 4 separate occasions that I can remember, including once in his very first appearance for trying to stop a GMPC from executing a villain that was pleading for his life. Actually, no, he didn't even try to stop the guy, just asked him why he was doing it, since my character had literally just popped in out of a time vortex like 5 minutes ago, and had no idea why any of this was happening. And it turned out they even had a good reason to kill the guy. He'd genocided an entire nation in order to test his new line of robot soldiers. Like, take 3 seconds to explain that. My character would totally agree that we should waste the guy. Of course, the worst case was my actual last day. But we'll get to that in a bit. The story. Spec Ops The Line, except without the self-awareness. So, there was actually a plot behind all of this. As I said in the intro, we were a sort of global peacekeeping agency. Sort of. There was also more to this, and it was psychotic. And I don't mean, wow, it sure was zany, either. The main villain wasn't. I mean, he was supposed to be. The main GM swore that he was. What we were supposed to believe, what the GMs told us, was that he was a pompous jackwagon with a personal vendetta against the head GMPC, who was making us look bad. In reality, he was also a hero, except, unlike us, he was actually competent. He hated us because we were a bunch of chronic fuck-ups, and most of his followers were the saviors of places we had devastated in our attempts to save the day. And I think I need to stop here, because I don't think I'm adequately conveying there was no irony in this. The head GM wasn't trying to be funny, or play up some ethical dilemma, or set himself up as the real villain. In fact, the entire lesson we were supposed to be learning from this plotline was the opposite. It was supposed to be a metaphor for the GM's own life, and how hard it is when everyone's against you just because you're a natural-born leader. And how, even when it seems like things are his fault, they're actually the fault of his many enemies who want to make him look bad because they can't handle how much stronger and smarter he is. The mission where it all came to a head. We were hired to exterminate some undead in a haunted house outside an otherwise peaceful town. Instead, we ended up awakening an eldritch horror in the form of a 500-foot tall super skeleton. See again my chronic fuck-ups comment from before. Surprisingly, our normally gung-ho GMPCs instead decided to actually run away. My character elected to stay and go down fighting to allow the townspeople time to evacuate. For his trouble, he got guns shoved in his face, incident number 4, and was forcibly teleported away. Of course, our rival, the real hero, showed up immediately afterward, and he and his actually competent team subdued the monster and saved the day. This, of course, was supposed to be the final straw to make us hate this bastard forever. And no, I get what you're going to say. Maybe, even though it makes no sense, maybe he really was somehow orchestrating all of this. Maybe he somehow put the monster there just to scare us off, then swoop in and save the day somehow himself. Maybe the giant skeleton was on his payroll. Who knows? But even if true, that would not explain what we did next. Oh yes, once again, it gets worse. So, my character complained about this. Unsurprisingly, he was the only one who did. It was explained to him by the GMPCs that even though we fought villains across the world, we were actually not a global peacekeeping agency. My boy was too new to know this, but actually, our charter was to only protect our own home city. Surprisingly, the GMPCs actually took my side. We would expand our charter to protect the entire world, and not just run away at every major threat that didn't involve us personally. Hooray! So, next mission, travel the world and assassinate every other hero. This was not a joke. I was informed that our next mission would be to hunt down every other hero in the world and give them an ultimatum. Join us, stop being a hero, or die. This was not meant to be ironic. This was what our head GM thought that a natural-born leader should do in this situation. He was utterly dumbfounded when my character left his team instead, which resulted in cannons being pointed at me. I was allowed to leave in spite of the cannons, but then had nothing to do. Which I guess is fair. Can't expect them to write missions just for me, unless they have some lesson to teach me. So I finally came back, just so I could actually play the game again. My last day. So what was the final straw? How did it finally get through to me that getting through to the GMs was impossible? Actually, it didn't get through to me. No, they had to throw me out. And it was for the dumbest thing you could imagine. It all started with us assaulting an enemy position. My character had a tactical question about how we were going to get past a guard post or something. I don't even remember. Since this was obviously a grave insult to the GMPC, who I was informed was a genius strategist, my character was punished by being mind-crushed down to 1 HP. Fortunately, this was before the mission, so all it meant was our party healer had to waste some of their healing on me. So, we assault the enemy base. We enter combat, and the genius strategist GMPC immediately mind-crushes my character again, getting him killed and completely blowing the mission, purely out of spite. So, after I got kicked from chat for the day for calling the GM a shithead, this wasn't unusual. Either me calling the GM a shithead or someone getting kicked from chat. That last one was the main GM's usual response to literally anything he didn't like, especially cussing. I was informed that night that I was not welcome back to their game, ever. My official crime was, of all things, quote, provoking the GM. He openly admitted that he had acted rashly and stupidly and had ruined the game for everyone, but insisted that it was all my fault for baiting him by asking a technical question of his genius strategist GMPC. And the icing on the cake for the petty megalomaniac. At this time, I was a major part of another online community. This community now had 2 people, myself and an at the time friend of mine, who, by the way, had also gotten banned from this game for provoking the GM, who had both disrupted his game with our narcissistic and belligerent behavior. This prompted him to ban everyone from our 50+ member community preemptively. He ended the game of his own volition not long after that. He had a lot of flaws in the system that he wanted to work out by making a 2.0 version, but couldn't be bothered, so he ended the game instead. After his game ended, he decided to come join our community. Because we weren't vengeful bastards and had no reason to hate him personally, we allowed it. We even made him one of our site admins after he paid to get us a new web server to replace our previous web server, which had a bad history of server crashes and outages. Of course, he was no better there. The only difference was, unlike his game, where he was the big man and had long since banned everyone who didn't suck up to him, here, no one put up with his crap. For his part, he didn't seem to want to actually be part of our community either. He never chatted with us or played forum games. His usual activities were either crying about how we weren't listening to his ideas enough, or else abusing his power on little easy targets, like a certain 11-year-old kid who wouldn't stop violating board terms of service. Eventually, the rest of us drifted off for our own reasons, mostly going away to college or getting jobs and families. Personally, I left just because all my friends had, and I didn't particularly like the people who were left. This ex-GM was the only one left, and paid the departing head admin a couple $100 to put him in charge. He then promptly permabanned all of our year's abandoned accounts before proudly proclaiming that he had, quote, stolen what we loved the same way we'd stolen from him. He ran the website himself for a short time, and turned the ongoing story, which was essentially a giant Smash Bros. Fanfic, into a self-insert ego wank story about how awesome and heroic, though also completely insane, but in a cool way, he was. Then he got bored of it too. In spite of all of this, I don't hate the guy. If anything, I pity him. Because of how he is, he'll always be alone for his entire life, and he'll never understand why. Besides, he gave me a crazy story to tell. Holy hell, that GM certainly sounds like the type to constantly go on power trips. I don't understand how OP was able to stick with it that long, and then even let the dude join his community. Of course, GM seemed like he only joined to spend hundreds of dollars to get revenge on people. Which is funny, since everyone left the community before he even got to ban everyone. To try and make a tabletop RPG system and have someone playtest something, only to refuse any suggestions and then punish said player for it, is really egotistical and spiteful. I have to agree with OP with the fact that this dude is kind of pitiful. Though, what are your thoughts? Do you have a story that you would like to be shared on the channel? If so, be sure to post it in the comments, on the channel subreddit, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope you never run into a DM like this one. Until next time.